everybody. You are listening to part one of a two-part discussion with my friend Sarah Taddeo. Sarah is a journalist at the Democrat and Chronicle out of Rochester, New York. I decided to split this up into two parts, so you're listening to part one, which is going to be primarily focused on media bias and objectivity in journalism. Personally, I felt like Sarah had some pretty interesting and useful things to say about media bias, how she sees it and how she handles it in her own work. So I think that being said, I'm just going to get right into it. So here is my conversation with Sarah Taddeo on media bias. All right, Sarah. First, I have to calibrate myself. I have to figure out. So you are not allowed to say certain things because of your job. So
correct.
I need to know exactly what I can ask and what I can't. So I'm just going to start off by asking you a series of questions I believe you can't answer. Okay. And then if you can, then I'll be pleasantly surprised. So This is just calibrate me. So question one, who did you vote for in 2016?
I can't say that.
Okay, you can't. All right, question two, who are you going to vote for in 2020?
I can't say that either.
Okay.
I can't. Okay, so if this helps you, I can't even have a bumper sticker on my car. Like okay. They would not.
So if we get into politics like later on in the podcast, can I ask you your opinion on candidates?
Not really.
Okay. All right, so we won't even get into that. So, yeah. Okay, question three. Did Epstein kill himself? Surely you can answer that.
Yeah, I mean, that, yeah.
I'm just kidding. All right, so I can't ask you much about politics then.
I can talk about it. I know it's a very fine line. I feel like I can talk about it broadly, like about political trends. I can talk about media bias related to politics. Yep. But yeah, I just can't say, I basically can't share my own thoughts about whether or not a certain person would be the best to govern, because then the whole idea behind that is basically conflict of interest.
Which is why this podcast will be so interesting. So I reached out to you because I have like a spidey sense for media bias. It's like a curse. I hate it. And it's like my friends will make fun of me because like I'll take a screen grab of like an NPR headline and I'm like, did you see the adjective they used for no reason? It's like, and they're like, Shem, that is not important. And I'm like, but it is. And it's like, it's so minor, but people like make fun of me for it because I find it so annoying. So I reached out to you because you're a journalist, the only journalist I know, but that's not why I reached out to you. And you're probably the perfect person to interview about media bias because, as we established earlier, you really can't say anything because of your work about like your political opinions. So that is, I feel like that's rare. I could be wrong.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because I feel like in our newsroom, I feel like we're in this bubble of like most journalists have the same rules we have. And I actually don't know. Like, I don't talk to a ton of other journalists on a regular basis, I should say. I see them like once a year at a conference, Yeah. But it's not like I'm regularly talking to people who work at the Times or work at the Post or work at whatever and asking them, what are your kind of like conflict of interest sort of objectivity standards, Maybe we should be talking about that more, but we don't. And so I don't know what other people's rules are, but I know that regularly we get reminded by USA Today, kind of our, I work for Gannett, so it's like the head flagship place, newspaper for us. We get emails from on high from them regularly saying like, remember, don't post on your social media about elections. Like, don't even support, don't have a bumper sticker on your car.
That
like,
seems
this is
so foreign to me. Not like personally. I just like every journalist that I know of besides you is someone on Twitter with a blue check mark. And it is like all they do all day is tweet their opinion. Like if they're not tweeting their own article, it's just an opinion about whatever they, whatever political thing. So it's like when you told me that, I was like, well, maybe this isn't going to work then, because I was hoping I could talk to you about, how you deal with it. But it sounds like you guys have like such a good culture. So I'm interested to hear more about it.
Yeah. I think, I just think we value that part of journalism. So I feel that we feel that it's two things are very intricately connected. your airing of your opinions on political things. And it could be not even political, like it might be just a big controversy that's going on in town, for example. And if you're like on Twitter one day airing your opinion and then trying to do an objective story on it the next day, people are very, with good reason going to question, like, well, are you just putting your spin on that story?
100%.
And so there's a very close relationship to those two things among our editorial leadership team. So if they see you doing one thing, they're like, well, you just undercut your own objectivity. That's bad. But at the same time, I also see the journalists on Twitter posting their own opinion. Yeah, and I'm like, so I don't get this. Like, don't they have these conversations with their editors just like we do? Like, you're not really allowed to do that. But I think it's human nature, right? So like everyone wants to air their opinion in the age of social media. Everyone wants to be able to kind of argue a side, and journalists are very sort of engaged with the news and everything. They want to be able to talk about those things. And I think sometimes, your human nature clashes with your work, and you might post something that maybe isn't objective. And then if you don't get yelled at for that, you just keep doing it, maybe. Yeah. I don't know,
Yeah, so, I'm wondering if there's I've heard the term like clickbait. I can't remember how they refer to it with the news, but like there's like a clickbait model now that I don't feel like was there. I think that is because there's so much online news now. You have to have a catchy headline.
Yes.
But you really need like a clickbait headline now to get people to click on your, because it's driven by ad revenue essentially. And I think yours is subscription based. Is that?
It's both. So it's subscription and ad revenue. Unfortunately, with the advent of digital ads bring in much less revenue per ad than a print ad would.
Oh, really?
So we've had to adjust our model.
Is it because it's more accurate? Like you can see exactly how many clicks you get?
I don't know. I'm not in advertising. I don't claim to know too much about it, but I don't know if it's just the way of the online world. It's just less expensive to buy one of those. Maybe. So
I wonder if it's because like if you have a subscription, like you have a subscription base, then they can say for sure you're going to get this many people seeing your ad, but they can't guarantee, they may not flip to that page, but they can say this is how many subscribers we have. Whereas with the online thing, you could get paid based on how many people actually click on. So it's real-time data. It's like you'll get paid based on exactly how many people see this thing, and we can see which cursor hovers over it and all that. So that might be why. I don't know for sure, but
yeah. So we are subscription-based mainly. Like that is the main way that we make a living every day is by the amount of people that subscribe. And we're in a really interesting place with that too right now, because we at the beginning of this year, last year, we implemented a hard paywall model where it was like for the best of our stories, essentially, we stop people at a hard paywall. They can't get around it with loopholes. And it's like, listen, if you like our journalism, you got to subscribe to be able to read
How has
this.
that gone?
Really well. It's actually really worked.
Nice.
And we they needed all the journalists to kind of get on board. And when people, for example, on social media would say, oh, can somebody post the article text in the comments so we can read it?
No, you cannot.
Yeah, we kind of jump in on the comment thread and basically be like, hey, I wrote this story. It took me, 10 hours to write it. I need to make money. I need to eat. So can you subscribe? Yeah, and a lot of times people do.
No, that's awesome. I have a podcast that I have listened to for like months, and it just like left YouTube for a paywall. And I was like I'm so torn because like I love his content, and he'll post like 30 minutes of it, and then it'll just cut right off at 30 minutes. So it's like you can't even finish the train of thought. It's just like no. Yeah. So I'm totally torn on it because like YouTube's ad revenue apparently wasn't doing it for him, and now I don't know if you've kept up with the YouTube adpocalypse stuff, but like,
not really.
Like YouTube used to be like the Wild West where you could post the edgiest content, it would get monetized. No one looked into that, and then journalists started like noticing, I think in bad faith, that's my own personal opinion because I'm not a journalist, so I can say whatever I want. I think in bad faith they started like seeking out YouTube accounts that were like edgy and not kid friendly. Some of them genuinely were like awful, like ISIS stuff, and there were ads on like ISIS recruitment videos because there was no real policing of it, and YouTube just was like, yeah, you can monetize whatever you want. If people watch it, we get we get the views on our ads, and you get views and you get paid. So
and then probably those companies, the ads that were running on those videos, they were probably not even.
They had no clue. Yeah. So that was what sparked it. Is one or two journalists broke that story, and then all the
Yeah.
ad companies were like, oh God. And like the worst thing you could have was like I shouldn't say, but it was like Pepsi, but I could be totally making that up. Pepsi had, their ad on an ISIS recruitment video. And so it was just a mess for YouTube and the ad company. So advertisers were pulling their ads entirely from YouTube as a PR move.
Yeah.
And then YouTube was like, we got to fix this now. And so they pretty much like removed ads from everything that wasn't like completely sterile, like everything that they knew. So they called it the adpocalypse.
Okay.
So when that happened, it was like you couldn't say, like there was an algorithm that was put in place. You couldn't say certain words. So as a journalist, if you wanted to report on some rape victim, you would be demonetized just for saying the word rape because it would get caught by the AI. And so no one could talk about anything. Everyone had to be super, there were like memes going around that, I'm a Christian channel, like even though you weren't, you just say like, YouTube, I'm a Christian channel. Like, please don't demonetize me.
Don't use any of these 10 words.
That has made people diversify where they get their revenue from. So there's, Patreon was a thing for a little while. And,
right.
That still is, but there were some scandals there where they were taking people off Patreon. Patreon was taking people off because they didn't like their content. And then it was like, there's a whole argument there.
Yeah.
I don't know. Were you familiar with that?
No, not that I'm not great with like tech news sometimes. Yeah. Like it like falls through the cracks for me.
That's my thing.
I've been
for
seeing
Patreon
reason. Around and I'm like, what is that? I don't know.
See, all it is it's just a really a payment method. So, and you can give they call them Patreon. So it's a payment method for it's like a voluntary paywall. So you can your people who like your content can give you $1 a month or $10 a month or whatever.
Cool.
Because they like your content and they want you to keep doing it, and they know that the ads are kind of sketchy. They may not be there one day and they might be the next day. It totally depends. And so it was like a way of guaranteeing that your content creator that you liked could stay making content, and they could guarantee some amount of revenue per month.
Right.
But then that sort of failed as well because Patreon started randomly dictating which content creators that they wanted to deplatform. And so they were like, okay, this one, we don't like their content and it violates our terms of service, even though it really doesn't. And, they started to, all the bad faith people started coming out and saying, we don't like this, you should get rid of this content creator. And so then people started having to come up with their own versions of Patreon. And it is an ever evolving thing. Not to spend too much time talking about how people get their revenue, but now you're finding more and more people. I'll bring it back. We're finding more and more people who are like, I have my own website now. I'll put 30 minutes of it on YouTube so you can, that's where everyone is. And then if you really like it, you can go to my website, you can give and join the paywall and that's it. So it is funny how the advertisement thing is just always evolving and shifting.
It is. And what's so interesting to me about just this short discussion is like, there was so much kind of brouhaha in the journalism world about people putting news out there for free on Twitter, basically, and YouTube, and people just kind of like not being even journalists. They just want to report the news in their own way, and they just do it for free and great. Yep. But now it sounds like those people, maybe they're not even news, maybe they're just content creators of whatever type, but they want to make money too on it. And they're like, wait, this way, trying to make money off of this is hard.
That's funny.
It is. Because if you're trying to report the news objectively, especially, like, you're not just thinking about your audience necessarily. I mean, you're thinking about them, but you have to report the news the way that you see it and what's happening, even if not everybody agrees with what's being said.
Man, that's such a funny point because there are people, I like follow people and unfollow people all the time. I'm not like committed to anyone. And it's because like, I might like the first 3 videos I watch. I'm like, okay, I like where this person's going. And then I see something, I'm like, nope. There's this guy, I'll just straight up call him out because he's a YouTuber, he has hundreds of thousands of followers and he'll never hear this. So, he's a public figure, but his name is Tim Pool.
Okay.
And there's sort of this meme on the internet where, Tim Pool claims to be a disaffected liberal and he claims to not like Trump, but he puts Trump in every thumbnail and he's like, Trump destroys Nancy Pelosi, this clickbait thumbnail. And then he just goes on and on talking about how great Trump is and how much, the Democrats suck. And I'm like, but then he'll be like, and I'm not even a Republican. And I'm like, okay, at what point do you become a Republican? Or like because his audience is, as far as I can tell, like, let's just say 80% generously Republicans, Trump supporters. And he started out being objective and honest. But now he's just basically editorializing everything. Everything is just his opinion on how Trump is just destroying the Democrats. And I'm like, why not just admit what you are at this point?
Exactly.
Like, why do you have to pretend like you're objective anymore?
Right.
Like, it's just people are leaving his platform, or they're leaving his page. Like, I had to unsubscribe because I'm like, I just can't handle the dishonesty.
Right.
And people defend him. They're like, well, you're trying to say that you know better than he does what he believes. I'm like, his actions are speaking louder than his I saw like a collage of his thumbnails on his videos, and it's just Trump's face on all of them.
Yeah.
Trump destroys whatever. I'm like,
yeah.
I get. Again, this goes back to the advertiser thing. I get that you have to get people to click on your videos, but to what expense? Like, it seems a little dishonest. And so that, again, kind of takes us back to the ad thing.
Yeah.
Like, how do you balance the advertiser thing with the clickbait thing? And
yeah, it's just so I feel like you either got to go one or two ways if you start to get an audience on something like that. You either have to be objective or you have to say out and out, I'm whatever I am. I'm Republican, I'm conservative, I'm liberal, I'm, because if you're going to say that, then you're going to get that, you're going to build that audience. Yep. and you have to be okay with that. Yes. If you're going to say that. But if you're going to say I'm objective or I'm not really anything and then act differently, then you're going to build that audience, and then your advertisers are going to see that you're building that audience. You're going to attract those kind of advertisers, like that's just going to happen. And so you have to decide what you are, and you have to have an identity and a brand. And, what's interesting is even in media, there are those that say out and out that they're liberal or conservative, and then there are those that don't but show it anyways, but my friend worked for a video platform, let's just say, in New York City, and she basically said, it's we report from the left, essentially. Yeah. And part of me was like, like, I can't believe you just admitted that because you're a news agency. But then I was like, but they're like buying into that. Like, that's their brand. Yeah, so they're just being outright about it. And then there comes the question, and maybe this is getting to some of what you want to talk about, like, does a news organization have to be objective? Like, to me, I grew up in school, like, that was what I was taught. And I went into my job knowing, like, and I just happened to go into a company where that was the standard, right? Like, we are objective, and every news place should be objective, and that's it. But then I talked to my friends who are at places like that say, and granted, it was an up and coming kind of news news outlet. It wasn't like the Times or something.
Yeah, right.
But it left me with that question of, like, is that what news looks like anymore? Is that what news should look like? And to me, my opinion is it should look like an objective, reporting of the news. But if that's not who your audience is, or that's not what the CEO believes, or whatever, then is that an essential part of the identity of news? I don't think it is anymore. And I'm not even sure a lot of people believe that it should be.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. So, I'm not even upset by like a left-wing or a right-wing news organization. What I'm upset by is the claim to be objective, or the non-claim to be left-wing or right-wing. So I don't think Fox News says that they're right-wing. I don't think that they claim. Maybe they're editorial, like maybe they're what do you call the anchors that are on at like 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock. They don't talk.
Oh, like prime time.
Prime time. Yeah, they're not news. They're totally commentating. Yeah. So I think they admit that they're right-wing commentators, but the news itself, I think, claims to be, and I could be wrong, but it claims to be objective, or it doesn't. At least it doesn't claim to be right-wing. Right. But it is. It 100% is. There's you couldn't even deny that. And you can't deny that because of all the right-wing people they have as the political commentators. And that's the same thing for CNN, is like, or MSNBC. Yeah. Like, oh my God, MSNBC is like, they spent like, however many years talking about Trump Russia 24/7. And then Fox News spent the same amount of time talking about how it was all a hoax. And it's like, how am I supposed to take your actual news and not put it through that filter? Like, and I don't know if they just expect people to know that, but it really bothers me that it's not just like we are the number one right-wing conservative news organization, on the airwaves. Like, that's what their slogan should be. And that's what MSNBC should be saying. We are the number one left-wing news organization, And the thing, and we could get into like New York Times, because New York Times is supposed to be, or was at some point, maybe.
And I'd be interested to know if we agree on the New York Times, because I feel like they do try, they put some work into trying to be objective, but I know a lot of people think they're left.
Yeah, well, they have, at very least, I've noticed since. So I'm not going to pretend like I read New York Times. Let's not even pretend like I subscribed to New York Times since I was 10 years old.
Right.
And, you hear people say, I have canceled my New York Times subscription for the first time. I actually know someone firsthand, but I hear it a lot online.
Yeah.
For the first time in 25 years, I have to cancel my New York Times subscription because I cannot look at the front page anymore and see the Trump bashing. And they're not even Trump supporters. It's just the same problem that I have. It's this this is the gold standard. This is the objective journalism. Are they the ones that have all the news that's fit to print? Or is that the Washington Post? I can't remember. One of them, Democracy Dies in Darkness, is the other one.
Shoot.
I can't remember which one's which. One of them is Washington Post, and the other one is New York Times.
I think Post is Democracy Dies in Darkness.
I think you're right. Yeah.
I don't
so all the news
that's
that. Fit to print, I think,
all the news
is
fit to print.
Either way, it's like I know. We don't have a third person. I'll get Taylor down here. Taylor, look that up. so to me, it is like that. That's all it is. It just want you to admit what you are. Because it's frustrating, and NPR is another one. They're probably better than most, but it is, to me, it's the adjective or the adverb that's thrown into the headline that is, this unprecedented something or other, and it's like, it's the little things that get me, and I'm like, you guys, if anybody should be objective, I think it's NPR. Yeah. If anybody should be, it should be NPR.
Well, public radio, and yes, it definitely should be more objective. Those kind of news agencies, I think, even have more of a burden to be accountable to their audience.
Oh, absolutely. It was funny because so NPR, so I used to listen to NPR, so I can't really speak for New York Times, but just to quickly summarize the New York Times thing was, I know people, and so. At the cafe, we had somebody who regularly would bring in, daily, would bring in a New York Times paper and set it on the counter. I was like, get that thing off the counter. Yeah. I'm like, oh, so just because, and,
that's funny.
And I would I out, and Taylor would be like, people actually like reading that, Shem. And I'm like, okay, sorry. So I stopped doing it, and he actually did end up canceling his subscription because I would just prod him a little, don't you feel like it's insultingly, I don't care who you voted for, but don't you think it's insulting the way that they're claiming to be objective, and their front page every day was it was almost always Trump, and it was almost always negative Trump. And every time I saw it, it was negative Trump. So I'm saying almost always for the times I didn't see, but every time I saw it, it was negative Trump.
Yeah.
And I was like, 50% of the population doesn't agree that it's negative. So either 50% is 100% wrong, or you're just not giving both sides. And you're supposed to be giving both sides. But the headline is not giving both sides. So to me, it's whether or not you consider that bias, and maybe I'm being too picky, but that's what I see. Yeah.
No, and you know what? I can agree with you there. I think when it comes to Trump, Times and almost all of the major news organizations, I feel like at least around the election and right following, it was pretty relentless.
Oh yeah.
And I'll say kind of from the news side of things, the way that a story comes together, it's everything that could feed onto bias is the headline, the photo, with the placement on the page, how big the photo is, whether or not something's changed halfway through. Maybe you change something online and then maybe the headline's different in print. I mean, that happens all the time. Yep. Actually, most of the time with most stories. So all of those things have to be thought out in a very, methodical way. And a lot of times with the way that news is going now, there's less people, there's less time to do things. The deadlines are earlier to get things into the press. And a lot of times those things don't get thought through because there just isn't anyone to think through them.
That's the other thing that always gets me is the time crunch. Is so, and before we get into this, I'm going to say it so that you can remind me to go back to it, because it's the perfect example of a time crunch media issue that blew up. And you may know what it is, but it was the what was the guy's name? The MAGA hat kid. So I was there that day or the next day. No, the next day, I think. I was there the next day.
With the Indian?
Yes. That whole debacle. Nick Sandman, I think Sandman was his name.
Yep.
So we'll get to that because that was the perfect example of jumping on something without having all the facts just because it looks a certain way. I mean, that is just the most tangible, catastrophic fail of journalism of all time that I can think of. Probably not of all time, but at least that I can think of in modern time. So. Yes. But before I go to that, I want to hear about I want you to talk me through how you like get a story, how like what are the processes to like refine it, make sure it's not too biased. Like, do you have teams of people? I know you probably have an editor.
Yes.
But is he the guy or she the girl or woman who makes sure like, hey, this is a little too biased? Like, what does that process look like? Talk me through your process for that.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, an idea could come from anywhere. Just starting with the story idea, could come from somebody giving us a tip through email, social media, through a letter, a phone call, any ways of communicating. Or maybe it's just something that I see on the internet, or a story that somebody else has covered that I kind of want to like copy in a different way, maybe different angle, that sort of thing. So yeah, but I approach every story saying, okay, who are the stakeholders? Who do I need to talk to about this? Who disagrees with this thing? How can we get them on the phone? And so it doesn't always end up being like a exact equal side by side sort of situation, because it does depend too on who calls you back, how many people, the time crunch, like where you are in terms of having to get something out, if it's breaking or not. So I'll just use a very recent example that I feel like is relatively simple. So I wrote about Cuomo's paid sick leave proposal that he wants to do in New York. And it would look like businesses with 5 to 99 employees offering every single employee 5 paid days of sick time per year, which I know hits you guys.
You're feeling me cringe inside. Okay, how are we going to pay for that? No clue.
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't matter.
So yeah, and then over 100 employees would be 7 paid sick days, and then businesses with 4 or fewer employees would have to provide 5 unpaid job protected sick days. So this is what he wants to do, right? So I look at that story and I say, okay, the state is kind of like one side, quote unquote. Yeah. So I get their statement, his thing on his website, whatever, the state of state book. Mm-hmm. I look at that. Mm-hmm. I put down some quotes. There you go. That's his side. Then I say, okay, how do we cover the people's side, quote unquote, of this, or who disagrees with this? And, of course, it's small businesses. So I call them.
I'm so disappointed I didn't get a phone call.
I know.
You probably
actually, I could have, because I cover the state.
You just read my mind. You don't even need to get a statement.
That is another rule. Actually, I'm not supposed to call my friends and interview them. So I couldn't. But you would be great on that, I'm sure. You would have a lot of things.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So what I did was say, okay, who are the different stakeholders? Small businesses, small business groups, different, business centers, that sort of thing. So that's what I called. I called 3 different business groups, and I ended up getting some of them back. One guy was a state guy. He works for a lobbying firm actually as well. So that was interesting. And then like a small business development center person, and then a small business owner who was also diverse. And he, just said, we can't afford this, basically, and had a really good, robust, like I ended up with a robust set of people who were different from each other, but had similar views on the fact that they didn't like this proposal, Yeah. And that was the story.
Oh, it's perfect.
Yeah. And then we do have editors who read them. Definitely bigger stories, which this one wasn't one of the bigger stories. But definitely bigger stories get a look over by editors, maybe several looks over. A lot of times bigger stories will get a look over by our lawyer to check that we're not throwing somebody under the bus unnecessarily. Like we've had several investigative pieces where we're like taking down a business or something, and we need to make sure every fact is correct.
I wouldn't even think of that. That's so funny. You have like a lawyer on standby.
Oh, right? Yeah. We have.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So actually, that's another good example I could bring up too, real quick, is with the biggest investigative story I've ever worked on a few years ago. We literally basically did take down a business that was a food truck builder in Rochester, who was scamming people. Allegedly, we think, scamming people. He has never been arrested for a crime because it's very difficult to prove these things, but basically was taking dozens of thousands of dollars from people, promising them a truck, signing a contract, and then no truck to be found for years.
Wow.
And like people were out $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for these trucks. Wow. So when our lawyer looked over the story, I mean, we were 2-3 weeks out from publication, he said, you guys need to go back to the owners who didn't really want to talk to us, but
of course,
go back to them and make sure that they get a chance to respond to every single allegation, which we really hadn't done. We just kind of said, these people are all mad at you. What do you guys think? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we didn't do every single, and he's like, you got to do that, because if they ever come back to us with legal counsel, you have to be able to say that you have gone to them with everything.
This is your lawyer who told you have to do
lawyer.
this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, so we did, and we sat down with them and we read through the whole laundry list of all the different allegations, and that was really awkward and hard. But then we knew that they had heard everything. They were not surprised by anything in the story. And we knew that we kind of had a clean record, basically, and that even if we were sued, they wouldn't win kind of thing. So that's another way that the whole like getting both sides comes in. It's not really a political thing necessarily, but more of a doing our due diligence thing.
Nice.
So,
so let's take all that info and now apply it to CNN.
I know. Maybe we should walk in and talk to them about it.
Yeah, I wish so badly I had like just one person that I just on the inside that could, and they probably couldn't even talk about it if they wanted to because it was a lawsuit and we don't even know how much, I don't know if you saw that they settled with, did you see how much they were, so I believe the number was 300 million that Nick Sandmann sued CNN for, and they settled. So I don't know exactly how many millions, but surely, obviously, millions.
Yes.
And I don't know when that will come out, if ever. It may not. I don't know if you have to disclose how much you settle outside of court. Probably not, because it's outside of court.
Right.
So
probably not.
We may never know.
Right. Right.
But
wow.
For sure, millions. I mean, it wasn't 10 grand.
Right, and he's gonna live forever on that.
Yeah, and he is still taking other publications, I don't know what you would call them, mainstream media outlets to court as well. So that's just CNN that settled.
Yeah, and I respect that because I think if you feel like your story is told wrongly or you feel like you're getting, an unfair shot at something, you should speak out against that, I think. Like I recently saw in our local news in Rochester, some business felt like the story that was told about them by a TV station was not accurate at all. And I think you should go to the TV station and talk to them directly about it. But what they also did was put it out there in public on Twitter, this is not accurate. So anybody who's reading this, like, know that we're basically working with the TV station to correct this. And I thought, ooh, that's a little rough PR for the TV station. But I think it's also a learning moment. Like, if, the business can put out their own advertising, their own talking points, whatever. But if they're going to work with a media agency to put something out there, they have the perfect right to then say, this was not accurate. And a lot of people, I mean, we get tons of emails all the time saying, this is not accurate.
Yeah, you got my name wrong or whatever. We had like 2 or 3 different local news outlets that wrote pieces on the cafe and like messed up the spelling of our name or like maiden names type of thing. And we just didn't care. We were like, it clearly wasn't a big story, and they didn't quite put as much time as they would have into other things, and I'm just completely sympathetic towards that. Like, it's and not the end of the world. You're not saying anything bad. It was a nice little article, but you could see how people make little mistakes, and sometimes those little mistakes could be accidentally big mistakes. That really
or maybe there's
off.
Just big mistakes because somebody really didn't take enough time on the story.
Definitely be that as well.
And so for me as a journalist, I'm like, if you ever feel that I have really screwed your story up, please come to me because we will correct it immediately if it's a factual error. Now there's a lot of other things that can go on, but if it's truly a problem like it was with this one business, you got to say something because that holds the media accountable to not being biased or whatever. And again, I've kind of said I'm questioning that and whether the role of media is changing and whether it should be unbiased. But right now, I think it should be unbiased. So if people can hold us accountable to that, I think that's great.
Yeah, I think I already said this, but I don't care if it is or isn't. Like, I know you're kind of struggling with whether it should be or I don't care. My one thing is that you just have to admit that you are or you aren't. So NPR, New York Times, Washington Post, they all claim to be, or if they don't claim to be, they don't explicitly admit to not being objective. And so that's all that matters to me. Like, I don't have anything against you being a right-wing news outlet or a left-wing news outlet. If you're a right-wing outlet, more power to you. You'll gin up that base. Left-wing outlet, same thing, and you can report all the negative sides of certain thing. And if you were smart, you could go to the left side and the right side and read both and be like, oh, okay, well, I don't really know what I believe, but it's cool to see both sides.
Right. But
totally okay with that. In fact, that's actually probably a good solution because
I do.
It's more wired like in our brains to, I feel like we're more wired to write about what we believe. Like we're going to write better about something we believe, in my opinion. So like if you really feel passionately about a certain side of the topic, that article is going to be 10 times better because you're going to be writing it from a place of passion as opposed to like begrudgingly hitting the keys for, the other side that you completely disagree with. So in some sense, it's probably better for you to just write what you believe in that perspective and then have a whole other outlet that does the exact opposite. And then maybe we'll develop an app or something that aggregates them together, I don't know.
I think you're right on one hand. On the other hand, though, I think like if everybody just said what they were, so you got right wing and left wing and then objective, I think we need all of them because depending on what kind of person you are, if all the media outlets just said, I'm this, I'm left wing and I'm going to sell you left wing news, or I'm going to sell you right wing news, or I'm going to be objective, like you could at least choose one of those things that you wanted to listen to, or maybe more than one. But you would at least know, and you wouldn't be feeling like the problem with partisan news right now is I feel like people are painting all news agencies like that. So regularly we hear at the Democrat and Chronicle where I work that we're a liberal news rag.
See, so I'm just going to go ahead and admit that when we were talking about having this discussion, I was like, I should probably do like a little bit of, after you told me that you aren't allowed to like admit your political affiliations or whatever, I was like, okay, that's really interesting. So I'm just going to do some really quick research. So I got on your website. I saw that the articles that were, behind a paywall, and I didn't click on those because I couldn't. But my go-to for whether or not a news outlet is biased is always, and this like never fails, is look up the Women's March and look up the pro-life march and see what like each one, because they're always like a day apart or very close. And so like Syracuse.com, I'll just straight up call them out, always prints the Women's March on the front page. And I've read through it. It is vomit inducing in my opinion. It is just all praise be to the Women's March on every account. And if they write one on the pro-life march, it's buried somewhere and it's like about, yours was about single issue voting, but it's about single issue voting in the worst way possible. When I went to your website, I was so impressed because I was very impressed. So the real story, in my opinion, is that the Women's March, at least the one in DC, is like petering out. And I think that is a story because it had like 1 million people the first year, and that was a story. But then they've continued, news outlets in general have continued to write the same story every year, and it's been less and less people. And there was all sorts of anti-Semitic stuff involved, also newsworthy, very low coverage. And this year we're down to 10,000 people, and we're still covering it like it's some big, event. And you guys covered it as you should have. That what's going on? Why is this petering out? Like, what's the deal? And it was very unbiased. There was people saying, "Hey, there's still you interviewed people. Hey, there's still movement here. I know it's not a lot of people, but like there'll be more next year." Whatever they said. And then, so I was impressed because it was a very objective article on the Women's March. Then I looked up the pro-life article, and again, very, very, it was neither for or against. It was basically about single issue voting, from what I remember, but it was almost in defense of it because it was like you brought up. I'm saying you. I don't know if you wrote it. I don't think you wrote it.
This and I should note the people in my newsroom. We only write local news. Okay. So if you're talking about the Washington marches, that would have been written by people at USA Today.
Okay.
In McLean, Virginia, near Washington,
D.C.
So
I searched on your website. Yeah. Would that show up on your website?
Yes.
Okay.
So we basically all websites that are owned by Gannett. Which is 109 properties at this point. We also merged with Gatehouse recently, also a giant media company. So now we have hundreds and hundreds of media companies.
So is a raise coming your way soon?
Yeah. Actually, no, we're going in the opposite direction, I think, because they did this to cut costs.
Okay.
But yeah, so anything national for the most part. Sometimes we travel for those sort of things, but very rarely.
Mostly
it's mostly from USA Today. And then every site gets to share that content, kind of like a newswire, like AP or something. So we take stuff from USA Today all the time. That's every single piece of national news is from USA Today. But we're all in the same company. We're all one big happy family. So we all share content whenever we want. And USA Today will take our content if something big happens in Rochester. There you go. Yep. So those pieces were.
Yeah. Well, just to say, I was very impressed because that's my go-to. It's the easiest thing because they're always right next to each other. One gets buried and one's on the front page every year. And I always think like, okay, well, there you go. I mean, there you have it. You have two groups of people and they couldn't be more polar opposite, basically. And one of them is getting the front page, one of them is getting buried, if not written about at all. So to me, it's like the perfect thing to check if there's a bias. And so the article for pro-life was basically about single issue voting. I kind of skimmed it. But what I liked was that it was kind of like, is single issue voting bad or is it good? Vaguely from what I remember. And what I would have said is, well, there's all sorts of single issue voting on the left. And, and they said that in the article. They said, well, climate change is a big single issue voter or a single issue voting, whatever concept on the issue, single issue on the left. And they mentioned that. They said it's not just a thing on the right. And I was like, I've never seen I've never seen that type of article in a non-right wing news outlet printed like that. So I was very impressed.
Nice.
I didn't dig too much, but I just looked at the headlines. I scrolled through and I didn't see anything that I thought was super clickbaity.
We do. I kind of make fun of us, though. I don't, nobody would say anything. Nobody would say that I can't say this, but we do stuff like, Governor Cuomo is releasing a proposal that'll affect you. Find out about it. Something like that. We do that, which I get sometimes eye-rolly about. But we don't. We really try, again, kind of like I said earlier, with headlines being a major point of bias. You can really screw over an article with just the headline, even if everything else is fine.
Yes.
People see that. It's on the front page.
Because a lot of people just see the headline and they don't actually read the article. And so that's I'll admit right now, I'm totally guilty with that. So
Everybody is.
I go out of my way to not click on a CNN article or the New York Times just because I'm so annoyed.
Yeah.
So my experience with it, 90% of the time is I see an unbelievably biased headline. I'm like, I'm not going to click on that. And so it could be the case that the entire article is completely objective, but you've already, in my opinion, told me which lens to view it through by the headline, and I'm not okay with that. So I don't even click on it.
And, one thing I'll say, I guess, kind of from the, behind the scenes, behind the curtain of the newsroom is a lot of times headlines are not written by us as the journalists.
Really?
A lot of times you might take a shot at a headline kind of in the CMS, when you're putting your story into the website, basically, but somebody else might change it later without your consent. Which does annoy us sometimes because sometimes you look at it later on the website published and you're like, I didn't write that or that's completely inaccurate or completely biased or something. But typically, if somebody's going to change it, they do reach out to you and say, hey, or have you come over to their computer and look at it. And sometimes I'll veto headlines and be like, no, that makes one group look better than the other. And, so we do try to take a lot of time on that because we know that we could really screw something over.
I really appreciate that. That's so impressive because it would just be so easy to get caught up, especially like, and I can just speak from my own work experience. You do get caught up in a little bit of a group bubble type of deal. Like you want all that's good for your group, and you don't really care about anyone else's group. Like you don't want like my work group. We don't want to be to blame for anything, and so we're always watching our back. And I could see how like journalists would just be like. Not as journalists like with a like an overarching journalism, but just like journalists at a certain company would be like, we got to get the clicks. Look, we got to look out for what's best for us. And so to not do that is more admirable because it really is like you're fighting against like BuzzFeed or whatever. That's just garbage. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just garbage. The headlines, the articles, it's all editorialized and. They again don't claim to be left wing as far as I know. I mean, if there's any, come on. But
I know.
I don't even know if they claim to be news, but they are acting like it. So.
I know. And what's so hard to me about companies like BuzzFeed is you can tell that they have investigative talent there. Like the people know how to find records, how to find people. I mean, they have done some like amazeballs stories,
I totally agree.
But it's very clear, I think, to any, like knowledgeable individual that they are left leaning. I mean, it just is. I wonder if you went to their editor and said, are you guys do you claim to be left leaning in your coverage? I wonder if they would say yes or not, because I think they're so left that it would be almost stupid not to say.
Yeah. And I don't know why you wouldn't. Like,
I don't know why you wouldn't. Because your base is that.
No right-wing person out there who's waking up in the morning and opening their BuzzFeed app to get their news. So, like, just admit it. I don't know if there's, like, maybe there's some hope for a growth in the future that could morph into, like, a bigger news outlet that's more objective, and that's why they kind of...
You mean for them? Like,
for them, maybe their long-term goal is to, like, just... Because they're not really... They didn't start off as a news organization, as far as I know. It's some internet clickbait thing that were...
Like cat pictures
10,
and videos.
10 things that your girlfriend's thinking about you, like just total nonsense. And then somehow they have different subcategories of BuzzFeed for everything.
Yeah.
And so maybe they're like, hey, if we don't admit to being left wing, if this thing takes off, if we have some crazy spotlight story, then we can make this thing, an objective, like BuzzFeed could be New York Times someday or whatever. So who knows? Maybe that's the motivation behind it. To me, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and what worries me, I guess, in this is kind of like all the newer organizations like BuzzFeed and, I don't even know how old Huffington Post is, but like, they seem kind of newer, I guess, than the New York Times, of course.
Yeah, they must
those
be.
were from the 1800s.
They both must be born out of the the internet age.
Right,
So I'm
the
guessing
internet
sometime
age.
in 2010s or
Yeah.
something.
So, but what bothers me is the lack of new media companies who clearly are trying not to be biased.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I don't think I could name even one that's truly trying to be objective and that has hit that goal consistently over the past 10 years. Can you?
No,
I mean,
the only one that comes to mind, and I don't agree that they're trying to be objective, but I don't see it that way, is there's this small news company, I think maybe out of Canada, called Quillette. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
Okay, yeah, I've heard. Yeah.
So they claim to be, I think what their claim is they claim to be like beholden to free speech. And I think they're supposed to be objective and unbiased, but I don't really see that. They're coming at it from, well, I don't know. I don't know if I read enough of their stuff. I have them like bookmarked on my desktop because I'm like, someone I trust said like, hey, Quillette is a good place to get your news.
Yeah.
But almost all of it is editorials. Like it's always.
Oh.
Yeah. So yeah.
Which is basically an opinion. That's opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be like a center, maybe it's like a centrist type of thing where they're very free speech oriented. They're not afraid to report things based on who's going to be offended by them.
So basically offend everyone kind of.
Offend everybody
mandate,
or like just don't be offended is basically
right.
Yeah, offend everyone or hopefully not offend anyone
right.
or people will get
right.
over it, you know.
Yeah.
Which actually that's maybe a good segue. I don't have this written down as one of my questions, but is there ever self-censoring that happens as a journalist in fear of offending a certain group of person?
Yeah, I mean, so
to the point where it affects the story. Like, would you not run a story, let's just say, for political correct reasons?
I don't think we wouldn't run a story. I think we would work with the journalists to correct something. So right now I'll give kind of the broader context of what I'm going to talk about. So we, as many other local news organizations are feeling, I think our main base of people is white suburbanites.
Okay.
Right? Those are the people who buy our paper.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We have a very segregated city, as is Syracuse, I think, in terms of the city neighborhoods versus the suburban neighborhoods and the white city neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. There's a very clear demarcation between the two, and very clear socioeconomic demarcation and everything. And it's really bad. And there's a bunch of reasons why that is. But we do not have readership in our minority communities. And our new editor who came in last year basically said, this is a problem. Like we are not covering these communities well because they're not reading about themselves. And that's directly related to why they're not subscribing to us, because they don't see themselves in our papers.
Do you think that's true?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes. And I think every person in our newsroom would say so. I think we cover the city, but the lion's share of it is negative crime. Our school district is a mess. Trying to work on those sort of stories. A lot of them may have come across negatively because it truly is a mess, but like trying to figure that out is hard. And so I think, our new editor's basically big push is how do we get people from these areas to see themselves in our paper and subscribe to us. Like that's the full circle, So in the past year, we've been way more cognizant of our coverage, and it's not so much censoring what we're already doing as it is including more to what we're already doing.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, it's not like we're writing whole stories and then ripping them off the press.
We can't write this because people are going to be offended.
Right. Yeah. No. It's more like including more viewpoints than we previously did, listening to people. So we've got this whole thing called the Mobile Newsroom that we're doing where every month we've been out at a location in a different quadrant of our city, and we have reporters and editors like in a community center, let's say, and we're there and we're going to community meetings and we're meeting people we've never met. And it has completely revolutionized, transformed our coverage because we're in these areas that we never reported on, especially not positively, like ever before in our history. So it's going to take a long time to catch up.
Have you seen how long you've been doing it?
About let me try to think when actually we started. So the Mobile Newsroom thing kind of really kicked off the change and the transformation we've seen, and that was in the fall, this past fall.
So it's not been too long.
No.
But have you seen any kind of increase in demographic change?
Yes, absolutely. And we've had people come into our newsroom who are of minority background, and they've said we've seen a marked change in your coverage, which has been really cool for us.
Yes, you can really confidently answer the question of when I asked you, like, did you think that's the case? You're like, yeah, definitely the case. We actually now have tangible evidence of it.
Yeah, and now we're seeing a turnaround. I think, like I said, it'll take years to really turn around and turn it into money for us. in terms of like subscriptions, which, and it's not just about the money, I should say. We want to be able to cover our community well, and that means covering every community in our community to the best of our ability, but what we'd hope is that people would then trust us enough to want to pay for our work,
Right.
But in order to be trustworthy, I think, our editor's idea, and I agree with him, is we need to be able to cover communities equally and without bias. And, when it comes to minority communities, covering just the negative things, that is a bias in a certain way. And people notice that right out. I mean, you could walk up to any Black person in our city and say, is the DNC bias? And they would say, absolutely.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's a form of bias. Yeah. Like a implicit bias.
Yeah.
I hate that word or
I
that
know.
phrase. I hate that phrase so much, and I actually have to say it.
I know.
It's so fun. I'm like,
I know, because it's something you don't know about yourself, right? Which is the worst thing.
It is an implicit bias for like a news organization to just like not really be thinking of a certain thing. But
well, it's media bias by omission.
There's all sorts of biases. That is what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that's been a huge eye-opener. Really, that's been the biggest thing for me when it comes to bias in my real work life in the past 6 months is those kind of biases. And so when we do write stories about those communities, I tend to run them by other people in our newsroom, sometimes people who are, people of color, sometimes not. But just to say, hey, does anything jump out at you here? Is there anything insensitive? Is there anything I'm missing? Because I don't claim to know it all. And, I'm a white person raised in a very suburban space, and I have learned so much in the past 6 months that I didn't know about, and this is all buzzwords, but like systemic racism and all that stuff. Like some of that stuff is freaking real, and some of it's more contrived, but some of it's real. And so learning about that and then being able to be sensitive as much as possible within reason has been really cool to me because I feel like it's helping me be less and less and less biased as I grow in my career.
The ideal
would
be to be as minimally biased. Yeah, well, I just again give a shout out to the Democrat and Chronicle because I haven't like scoured it, but who cares what I think anyways. So but I was impressed. I really was impressed. I think when I reached out to you, I was like partly hoping that there was like a ton of biased articles that we could talk about and I guess I don't know if I'm more happy or less happy that you guys are not that biased, but I should be happy. So here I am.
Yeah. Well, I guess if you think that media organizations should be unbiased, then you'll be happy with us.
And I do. Yeah. I'm just like, I'm thrilled because I just assumed it was like Syracuse.com or any of the other local papers. And they get scattered throughout our office and I read them and I see them and I'm just like, this is a joke. Like, it's just a joke. It's so left-wing. And so that's the other thing I was going to ask, because I've said it's so left-wing a lot. Do you feel as though there is just a dominant left-wing culture in media in general? Because when I think, just to give you an idea where I'm coming from, when I think about the right-wing news outlets, there are some online that are not very well known, because I kind of looked them up, but there are a handful that are like center-right. Not super familiar with them, not very mainstream. You got your Breitbart, which no one takes seriously. Some people do, but mostly no one takes seriously. And then you've got Fox News, and I can't think of any other ones.
Then there's Washington Examiner, I feel like is one.
Yeah, that's one on the list that I was not super familiar with.
Yeah, it's pretty small, I feel like.
Yeah, it's technically a center-right according to the graph I saw.
Okay. Did you see that graph with like all the boxes?
Yeah, and it's like center-left, center-right, far-right, like right. And so and I think it's based on, they must do like I don't know how they would calculate that other than like editorial pages. Like,
I know.
Aggregate the...
Yeah, I've looked at it several times because I keep asking myself, who made this and how biased are they?
It's
because
you
really,
really
I think
like
it's a
look
legit
up
question.
Like adjectives.
Right.
You have to scour every.
Yeah.
It has to just be someone's sense of how biased it is.
I know. I hope it could be more like an actual study. But I just don't know the background of the graph.
But I looked at it just to get an idea of how many right-wing news outlets there were, and I didn't know like any of them.
I know. Well, The Hill was another one that I've seen on there, and so this is a good point. I want to bring up the Week. Have you ever read The Week? It's a magazine.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
It doesn't sound familiar at all.
So on that graph, it was left of center by a little
Okay.
bit. But it's cool because basically it's an aggregate news agent. Like they don't have their own reporters.
Oh, that's interesting.
So let's say they write about, Trump's latest tweet. Okay.
Right.
And what they'll say is like, they'll basically aggregate a bunch of opinion pieces.
Yeah.
So it'll be, blah, blah, blah. And the Washington Examiner says blah, blah, blah. And then it'll be a few sentences or a paragraph about that. Mm-hmm. Then it'll be, but from slate.com,
yeah.
And so it takes everyone's thoughts and puts it into one article.
And it still ended up as center left.
Right, I know.
It's funny.
Which is, I keep reading them and I'm like trying to look out for bias. I don't see it very much because I literally think they take like too conservative and too liberal and put them into each story. So it's very much of a formula.
Yeah, I wish I knew more about the study that created that, because if it was just some like huge study, then you could assume that if there is an overarching left-wing bias in journalism in general, even on the right wing, like right wing is even somewhat left-wing, then you could see if you took the two and put them together, it would still end up being slightly left-wing. But right. I don't know if that's how they did it, so I can't speak to it.
I know.
But that is
I don't know. We should look into that.
I know. We should.
But yeah, to your original question about do I feel like media is overwhelmingly left-wing? That was your question, right?
Yeah. I don't know if overwhelming. Yeah. Overwhelmingly, or just majority. In general, journalists tend to be more left-wing is really the question. So to me, it isn't really a question of whether or not there's a left-wing bias, because that's pretty clear. It's more of where does it come from? And I think what I've seen is that journalists tend to be more liberal. Like the people who go into journalism tend to be more liberal. And I've even heard the people at Fox News are more liberal than you would ever imagine. They just can't report certain things because of what comes down from the top. So it's like they had to specifically make Fox News a right-wing organization to fill that market, because there just seems to be an overwhelmingly left-wing. Yeah. I'm using the word bias, but not in the same way, but biased for journalists. So do you find that with your your coworkers? Yeah. The general atmosphere? I don't know if you can quite speak to that. I know it's like. Yeah.
So actually, I mean, on par with kind of how we conduct things with our news agency, I don't actually know who many of my coworkers voted for. That doesn't get talked about really in the newsroom. What I can say is that I would say, yes, the majority of people in the room do have more of a left-wing bent. Mm-hmm. But I can't say that for sure, but just kind of based on conversations, I think so. I think it may come from, and this is me kind of shooting in the dark, just as my theory. I think it may come from kind of the way that colleges and elite kind of culture has slowly gone to the left over the years. Yep. Yeah. I mean, every journalist has to go to college, most of us have bachelor's degrees, if not master's. Some people have random PhDs and different things before they came to journalism. So it's a very intelligent bunch of people, very well-schooled, and again, not to say that people on the right aren't, but it's kind of like this weird connection between the intellectual space and left, and I wonder if that's what's driving it.
Yeah, I think you're onto something, because to go to the university thing, I spent a lot of time ragging on the university just because it's so unbelievably left-wing, and it's become something really odd. I mean, it's almost embarrassing.
Get it. Yeah, I don't understand how we
Jonathan
got there.
Haidt, who is I believe a professor, maybe a psychology professor. I have a couple of his books, but I can never remember. I meant to look it up. I can never remember what he actually does. I mean, he's an author, but I think he spends a lot of time doing psychological analyses. I don't know how to say that. I don't know, analyses. But he has documented that over time, less and less conservatives are teaching at universities. So it used to be like 50-50. Yeah. You get a good mix of ideas. It was very free speech oriented. And then as time has gone on, and it's unclear why, as far as I'm concerned, it's unclear why. Maybe because of political correctness, you don't get as much of the conservative opinion as you used to. There's less free speech available on the campuses. And so you're just getting, for whatever reason, you're getting more and more. It could be like 75% liberal professors and 25% conservative professors. And those 25% conservative professors can't even really voice their opinion. Right. So Jonathan Haidt had detailed out in one of his books, I think The Coddling of the American Mind, because he talks a lot about universities. Yeah, have you read that?
I haven't, but I've heard of it. And
borrow it? It's so good.
Maybe I will, actually.
It's so good because it speaks to me in all the right ways.
Speaks to the depths of your soul.
It really does, because I'm just so like people just. are being taught to be so fragile. And he calls it one of the untruths. And he's like a liberal. So this isn't like a lot of the books I read that like speak to me are written by liberals, like true liberals. And that's what people don't realize. Like when I recommend a book to someone, they're like, it's going to be some right-wing garbage. And I'm like, it's not. It's written by a liberal who believes most of the things you believe, but he's not crazy. And so like he details out that young people are anti-fragile. They think they're fragile. They think that if you drop them, they're going to break. But it actually turns out not only are they not fragile, they're anti-fragile. So the more you drop them, the more they can learn and be stronger. It's like just a deep truth about humans. And we are telling young people, like, if it offends you, like you can't even question the fact that it offends you. Like you should confront the person who offended you. You should or run from them, depending on who tells them. And so he just details all this stuff out in his book, and he has the psychology background to back it, and he has a million references in the book. But anyways, he detailed out, I believe, in that book that less and less conservative professors are finding their way on campuses. And I can't remember the reason for that or if he knows the reason for it, but it is in the data. And so you to your point, then he also specifies that the arts, like the liberal arts, which I don't know if journalism classifies in that category.
So my bachelor's was a BS, so Bachelor's of Sciences at Syracuse. So I think it's classified differently based on which college or university you go to, which is kind of interesting. Like it could be a BA or a BS, or be in the College of Arts and Sciences, or be in its own communications school. Typically, actually, it's in a communications program. But that's a really good question. I don't know if it's typically one or the other. I'm going to assume it
falls into like the category of liberal professors. That I'm just going to assume that it's in that, like the journalist is in that camp.
Is in kind of the arts camp.
Yeah, the arts camp. Yeah.
I would say that's probably a pretty accurate assumption.
Yeah, I don't know for sure, but I'll just assume. But if that is the case, then you're getting more and more left-leaning professors instead of, a good mix.
Yes.
And then maybe you're impressionable when you're in college. You get into journal school, you join the bubble, and.
Well, yeah, and I think so like to your point, I haven't read that book, but like, if there's only 20, let's say 25% of all the college professors are conservative, and then they feel like the minority, so then they leave, and then there's less, and then they leave, and it could just be like pressures of feeling like the only one in that sphere, and then you just leave, and then by kind of like, therefore, there's just going to be less conservative on
or
campus.
If you're there, that culture that is dominant on not all college campuses, I don't want to say that, but in his book, he does also detail that it is mostly, almost exclusively, East Coast schools and West Coast schools. So it's like the Northeast schools specifically. So, Syracuse University falls in that category. Okay, I'm going to cut this off right here and call it part 1 of the conversation. I think things start to drift more into cultural topics after that. So if you found value in this discussion, please subscribe or leave a like. And if you feel like you want to leave a dislike, I just ask that you leave a comment as well so I can get some constructive criticism out of it. So thank you for listening.